She stood at the altar. He destroyed her in front of everyone. Then a mafia boss saved her life and discovered the secret that changed everything. If this story grips you the way I think it will, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now settle in, because what happens to Elena Ashcroft in the next 2 hours will stay with you long after it ends. The ballroom smelled like white roses and money. That was the first thing Elena Ashcroft noticed when she stepped off the elevator on the 42nd floor of the Meridian Grand. The kind of smell that gets pumped through expensive ventilation systems to make people feel like they belong somewhere they don't. 300 white roses arranged across 12 circular tables, ivory candles burning in columns of crystal. A string quartet playing something soft and European in the corner, while guests in evening wear shifted and murmured and sipped champagne that cost more per bottle than Elena had made in her first month working at the architecture firm. She had stood in this ballroom 11 months ago when Grant had first brought her here for what he called a spontaneous anniversary dinner. He'd pulled her to the window overlooking Fifth Avenue and said, "This is where we're getting married." She had laughed because she thought he was joking. He wasn't. He never joked about money or spectacle. Now it was the 15th of March, 4:40 in the afternoon, and Elena was 6 months pregnant. She stood in the bridal suite off the East Corridor, staring at herself in a full-length mirror framed in gold leaf. The dress was ivory silk, empire-waisted to accommodate the swell of her abdomen, and it had cost more than she was comfortable acknowledging. Her dark hair was pinned up with pearl clips, and the makeup artist had done something careful around her eyes that made her look less exhausted than she actually was. Behind her, 2 bridesmaids she barely knew were having a whispered conversation about someone named Derek. Elena pressed her palm flat against her stomach. 2 lives in there. 2 heartbeats she heard at every Thursday appointment, steady and fast, like small engines running clean. A boy and a girl, the ultrasound technician had told her at 22 weeks, though Grant had wanted to keep the genders a surprise. She'd told him afterward, privately, because secrets between partners didn't sit right with her. He had kissed her forehead and said, "Perfect." The word had felt hollow even then. She hadn't examined why. Her matron of honor, Cassie, appeared at the suite door with a flute of sparkling water and an expression that was working too hard at cheerful. "5 minutes," she said. "They're ready for you." "I know. You look incredible." "I know that too." Elena turned away from the mirror. "Stop hovering." Cassie hovered anyway. That was the thing about Cassie. She was constitutionally incapable of giving people space when she thought something was wrong. She'd been Elena's closest friend since college, which meant she'd also been the first person to say, quietly and only once, "Are you sure about Grant?" Elena had told her yes. Cassie had not brought it up again. Elena picked up her bouquet. Pale peonies, no roses. She had insisted on that much. The corridor outside the suite was carpeted in deep burgundy, and the sound of the ballroom reached her as a low, gathered murmur. 300 people in a contained space, the particular white noise of a crowd waiting. Elena's heels clicked against the marble threshold where the carpet ended, and one of the event coordinators appeared from nowhere to hand her a small earpiece. "Mr. Holloway wanted you to have this," the woman said, professionally blank. "He said to tell you everything is ready." Elena looked at the earpiece and didn't take it. "Tell him I'll be there in 2 minutes." She waited until the coordinator retreated, then stood alone for a moment at the edge of the corridor. Through the tall doors ahead, she could see the back rows of guests, the setup of the altar, archway of white flowers, officiant in a dark suit, camera operators stationed at the periphery because Grant had arranged for the ceremony to be professionally filmed. Everything staged, everything considered. She had a sudden sensation, vivid and unsettling, like the feeling before you realize you've forgotten something essential, keys, a name, the reason you walked into a room. She pushed through it. The doors opened. The string quartet shifted into something processional, and 300 heads turned. Elena walked. She focused on the altar, on the officiant's calm, practiced face, on the archway of flowers, and the way the late afternoon light came through the windows at a low winter angle, throwing long golden rectangles across the parquet floor. She did not focus on the faces of the guests, which was a habit she had developed over the past year of attending Grant's events. Learn to look at the architecture, not the people, because the people were always measuring you against some standard you hadn't been told about. Grant was waiting at the altar in a charcoal suit. He was, objectively, a good-looking man. 41, lean, the kind of jaw that photographed well. Dark blonde hair gone slightly silver at the temples. He had the particular posture of someone who had grown up being told he was exceptional, and had spent his adult life making sure the world confirmed it. He was watching her walk toward him, and something in his expression was wrong. She couldn't name it immediately. It was too subtle. His face was doing all the correct things. Slight smile, warm attention, the performance of a man watching the woman he loved approach him. But underneath that, something else was running. His jaw was set in a way that had nothing to do with emotion. His hands were still at his sides in a way that wasn't natural for Grant, who usually couldn't resist adjusting something. His cufflinks, his lapel, the sovereign ring on his right hand. Elena reached the altar. The officiant smiled at both of them. Grant turned to face her fully, and she saw it then. Not in his eyes, which were still doing the thing, still performing, but in the small muscle at the corner of his mouth that twitched once and went still. "Dearly beloved," the officiant began. Grant reached into his jacket pocket. Elena's brain registered this as odd before she understood why. Men didn't reach into pockets during wedding ceremonies. There was no practical reason for it. The rings were when the ring bearer, a 7-year-old nephew, positioned 3 steps to the left, swaying slightly with boredom. Grant pulled out a folded piece of paper and a small tablet device. The officiant faltered and stopped. Silence landed on the ballroom like something physical. "I need to say something," Grant said. His voice was measured, clear. He was using his boardroom voice, the one Elena had heard him use when he was about to restructure someone's contract or inform a subordinate that their department was being absorbed. Calm in the way that isn't calm at all, but is instead the deliberate absence of visible feeling. "Grant," Elena's voice came out steady. She was proud of that. He didn't look at her. He turned slightly toward the guests. "I apologize for this, truly. But I believe the people in this room, my family, my closest colleagues, my friends, deserve the truth before this ceremony proceeds." The murmur that moved through the crowd was low and collective, the sound of 300 people recalibrating. "I've been conducting a private investigation over the past 2 months," Grant continued. "What it revealed has been—" He paused. A theatrical pause. Elena recognized it now for exactly what it was. Deeply painful. And I feel I have no choice but to address it publicly, because what is being concealed affects not just me, but the children Elena is carrying. Elena heard her own pulse. "I am not the father," Grant said. "These children are not mine." The murmur became something louder. Elena could feel it, the physical sensation of 300 people inhaling. She looked at the tablet in his hand. He turned it outward so the front row could see. A series of photographs, printed correspondence, what appeared to be medical documents. She caught a glimpse of one image, a hotel lobby, a man she had never seen in her life, her own face in the frame but wrong. Wrong posture, wrong clothing, wrong everything. "These are fabricated," she said. Her voice came out stronger than she expected, strong enough that the front row heard her, and the silence deepened. Grant finally looked at her. His expression was something she had no name for. Not hatred, not guilt. Something bureaucratic, final. "I expected you to say that. I've never seen that man. I've never been in that hotel. The documentation is fabricated." She took one step toward him, and she was aware of the absurdity of this, standing in an ivory silk maternity gown, pregnant, at an altar, having this conversation in front of 300 people. And she felt, underneath the shock, something unexpected. Fury. Pure and cold and clarifying. "Look at me," she said. "Look at my face and tell me you believe what's on that tablet." Grant looked at her. His jaw flexed. He did not say anything. "You can't," she said, "because you know it's not true." "Elena." His voice shifted very slightly, just enough. "This isn't the conversation to have here. You started it here." A sound from the back of the room, someone getting up, chairs scraping. Elena didn't turn to look. She held Grant's gaze and tried to find in it something that explained the past 11 months, something that would make the architecture of this moment make sense. She found nothing. Whatever had been there when she met him, whatever warmth she had believed in, it was gone or had never been. Behind his eyes was the expression of a man finishing a transaction. "I'm sorry," he said, and he genuinely did not sound it. He stepped back from the altar. Elena stood alone in front of 300 people under crystal chandeliers and the smell of too many white roses, and the silence was the loudest thing she had ever heard. She didn't cry. She was aware of that later, with a kind of grim satisfaction. She did not cry. What she did was pick up the skirt of her dress with one hand, turn, and walk back up the aisle. People moved. They shifted in their chairs, parted without meeting her eyes. She saw Cassie standing at the back of the room, both hands over her mouth, and Elena shook her head once, "Don't," and pushed through the ballroom doors alone. The corridor outside was empty and quiet and smelled like nothing. Elena walked to the elevator and pressed the button and stood there with her hand resting on her stomach, breathing, just breathing, because the twins were moving. They moved when her heart rate went up. They had done this since week 18, and she needed to be steady for them even when everything else was coming apart. The elevator opened. She stepped in. She rode it to the lobby in silence. The lobby of the Meridian Grand was all marble and indirect lighting, a fountain at the center, bellhops moving through with the practiced invisibility of people paid to blend in. Elena walked through it and out through the revolving doors and into the cold. March in New York. The cold hit her like a slap. The real kind of cold, the kind that has weight to it, that finds every gap in your clothing and presses in. The sky had gone low and gray while she was inside. The early sunset of late winter already beginning to pull the light out of the streets. Rain was starting. Not the dramatic kind, but the persistent kind. The kind that soaks you slowly and completely. She had no coat. She had walked out of the Meridian Grand in an ivory silk maternity wedding dress in the rain on 57th Street, and she had nowhere to go. She started walking anyway. The heels were a problem immediately. The sidewalk was wet and uneven, and at 6 months pregnant, her center of gravity was already shifted, and twice in the first half block she had to catch herself against a lamppost, against a mailbox. People moved around her without slowing. New York did this, absorbed the extraordinary without comment, incorporated the surreal into the pedestrian without breaking stride. A pregnant woman in a wedding dress walking alone in the rain was, on the scale of what Fifth Avenue had seen, unremarkable. She reached for her phone and remembered it was in her clutch, which was on the table in the bridal suite 11 floors above her. She had no coat, no phone, no money. $67 in a small emergency fold of cash she kept in her bra, a habit from years ago when she had no money and things could go wrong in the ways that they go wrong when you have no money. She reached for it now, reflexive, just to confirm it was there. It was. $67 and a piece of folded paper with a phone number she'd written down 3 weeks ago and never used. She turned east toward Madison and kept walking. The rain was getting harder. Her hair was coming down, the pearl clips losing their hold, and she felt them going, one, then another, tiny impacts against her shoulders as they fell. And she didn't stop to retrieve them. The dress was soaked through across the shoulders now, the silk going heavy and cold against her skin. She was thinking, even through the shock and the cold and the rain, with a particular mechanical clarity that she recognized as the version of herself she became under real pressure. Not the performance of composure, the actual thing. Her mother had called it the quiet switch. You go very quiet when things get bad, Ellie, and most people would call that strength, but I think it scares me a little. Her mother had been dead for 6 years. The quiet switch was on. She was thinking, the fabricated photographs, the precision of them, not just her face in the wrong context, but her face with particular attention to continuity errors she would have to examine carefully to identify. Someone had spent real money and real time on those images. That level of fabrication wasn't impulsive. It wasn't emotional. It was planned, which meant Grant had planned this, not as a response to something she'd done, not as the panicked reaction of a man who had convinced himself of something untrue, as a scheduled event, a deliverable. She was also thinking, why publicly? Why 300 witnesses? Why the tablet held outward toward the front row like a presentation? She was so deep inside the mechanics of it that she almost didn't register the truck. What she registered first was the sound, the wet hiss of large tires on rain-soaked asphalt moving faster than they should, the particular high pitch of a diesel engine not decelerating. She was crossing 56th Street on the walk signal halfway through the intersection, and she looked left, and the truck was there, a delivery vehicle of some kind, running the light. The driver either not seeing her or... Time did something strange, not slow, exactly, more like clear. She saw the grille of the truck. She saw the distance between it and her and understood it as insufficient. She was aware of her hands moving to her stomach, both hands, reflexive and absolute. Then something hit the intersection from the north. Not hit her. Hit the space in front of her. 3 black SUVs came through the intersection fast from the northbound lane, the lead vehicle cutting hard left, and the truck's driver finally hit the brakes. She heard them, that long, wet shriek. And the truck's front end glanced off the rear quarter of the lead SUV, spinning it slightly, and the truck jackknifed to a stop 6 feet from where Elena stood frozen in the middle of 56th Street. The rain kept falling. The driver's door of the lead SUV opened. He was tall. She registered that first, the way tall registers before anything else, the way it reorganizes spatial information. 6'2", maybe more. Dark coat, no umbrella. Black hair, wet now from the rain, pushed back from a face that was... She would think about this later, about the inadequacy of available vocabulary. Serious. Not handsome in any conventional performed way, but structured in a way that suggested permanence. The kind of face built to last, to weather things, to remain recognizable under pressure. He crossed the intersection in 4 strides and stopped in front of her. He looked at her, then down at her hands over her stomach, then back at her face. "Are you hurt?" His voice was low, not gentle exactly. There was no performance of gentleness in it, but precise. "No," she said. "Are you sure?" It wasn't a question, quite. More like a calibration. He was checking her the way you check something valuable that's been dropped, looking for damage before moving it. "I'm sure," Elena said. He nodded once. Then he looked at the truck, at the driver who was climbing out now, pale and shaking, already on his phone. He looked back at Elena, and his gaze dropped briefly to the silver necklace at her throat. She wore it always, had worn it since her mother's death, the only thing she'd been given with the instruction, "Don't lose this." And something happened in his face. It wasn't dramatic. It was the opposite of dramatic. The kind of internal shift that happens behind someone's eyes when information lands that they weren't prepared for, that changes the shape of something they thought they understood. A fractional stillness, a recalibration. "Where are you trying to go?" he said. "I don't know," Elena said. And because she was exhausted and soaked and had just been publicly destroyed and almost hit by a truck, she said it honestly. Without performance, just the truth of it. "I don't have anywhere to go right now." He studied her for another moment. The rain was heavy enough now to hear against the roofs of the SUVs, against the asphalt, against the silk of her ruined dress. "Get in the car," he said. "I don't know you." "No?" he agreed. He didn't elaborate. He didn't try to make it safe or reasonable or comfortable. He stood there in the rain and offered her a fact and left the choice to her. Elena looked at him. She looked at the necklace between her fingers, the silver chain, the small pendant with its engraved crest that she had never been able to identify, that her mother had pressed into her hands at the end and said, "This is yours. This has always been yours." And she looked back at his face and at whatever had moved through it when he saw it. "Who are you?" she said. "Dominic Falcone," he said. She knew the name. Everyone in New York knew the name. "You're getting wet," he said. Elena Ashcroft, 6 months pregnant with twins, standing in a ruined wedding dress in the rain on 56th Street, looked at one of the most dangerous men in America and made the only decision available to someone with nowhere else to go. She got in the car. The SUV's interior was warm and dark and smelled like leather and something faintly chemical. Gun oil, she would realize later, though she had no experience with the smell and couldn't name it at the time. She sat in the rear seat, and Dominic Falcone took the seat beside her, not touching her, leaving space, and the vehicle moved into traffic with the particular smooth authority of a car driven by someone who expected other vehicles to yield. No one spoke for 3 blocks. Then Dominic said, without looking at her, "That necklace! Where did you get it?" Elena wrapped both hands around the pendant. "My mother left it to me." "What was her name?" "Why does that matter?" He looked at her then. In the low interior light, his eyes were very dark, and the expression in them was something she couldn't read yet. Something between focus and something older, something like a man looking at a problem he had believed was resolved, discovering that it wasn't. "It matters," he said, "more than you know." The SUV moved north through the rain. In the bridal suite of the Meridian Grand, 37 floors above street level, a phone buzzed on a white linen table. Elena's phone. The screen lit with a text from a number she didn't know, had never saved, had never seen, and the message was 3 words long. "Don't trust him." The screen went dark. No one was there to read it. The Falcone estate sat 12 miles north of Manhattan behind a stone wall that predated the highway running alongside it by 40 years. Elena saw the wall first, gray limestone, 8 feet high, continuous, the kind of construction that wasn't about aesthetics, but about the particular architectural vocabulary of people who needed to know exactly where their property ended and the rest of the world began. Iron gates at the entrance, 2 men in dark clothing who didn't wave the convoy through so much as step aside with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this 10,000 times. The main house was large without being ostentatious. That surprised her. She didn't know what she had expected. Some cinematic monument to criminal wealth, columns and fountains, and the aggressive display of a man who needed you to understand what he was worth. Instead, it was a sprawling fieldstone structure, 3 stories, ivy dead and brown against the north face in the March cold, lights burning in the lower windows. It looked like money that had been in the same family for generations and had stopped needing to announce itself. She was brought inside by a woman named Petra, late 50s, compact, wearing a dark cardigan, and the expression of someone who had seen considerably stranger things arrive at this house than a soaking wet pregnant woman in a destroyed wedding dress. Petra said nothing except "this way," and "mind the step," and led Elena up a back staircase to a guest room on the 2nd floor that had a fire already going and a bathroom off the side. Dry clothes had been left on the bed. A heavy sweater, loose pants, wool socks. Elena didn't ask how or why. She changed out of the wedding dress in a bathroom that had heated floors and a mirror lit from the sides, and she stood for a moment in the warmth and looked at herself and took inventory. Herself, still. Intact. The twins moving in low, rolling shifts the way they did when her body was finally slowing down. She pressed her hand against the left side of her abdomen where one of them was pushing. A foot, she thought, or a fist, and held it there until the pressure eased. Then she dried her hair, put on the dry clothes, and went back downstairs to find out exactly what she had walked into. Dominic Falcone was in a room off the main corridor that was neither quite a study nor quite an office but contained the equipment of both. A long table covered in documents, 2 laptops open, a whiteboard along the far wall with photographs and timelines and red string connecting things she couldn't read from the doorway. He had changed too, or had never been wet in the way she had been, and he was now in a dark shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, standing at the whiteboard with a phone to his ear and his back to the door. "Pull everything on Holloway going back 8 years, he said into the phone. "Property holdings, offshore accounts, anything moving through the Cayman structure we flagged in January. Tonight." He paused. Listened. "I don't care what time it is." He ended the call and turned. He looked at her in the doorway and said, "Sit down. There's food coming." I don't want food." "Then sit anyway." Elena sat, not because she was compliant, she wasn't, had never been, but because her feet hurt and she was 6 months pregnant and the chair nearest the fire was available and she was not going to refuse a reasonable accommodation out of principle. She sat and looked at the whiteboard and tried to read what she could from across the room. "That's Holloway's financial network," Dominic said, watching her look at it. "You were already investigating him." "I was already investigating the acquisition attempt on 3 port logistics companies in the Northeast. Holloway's name appeared in January as a secondary party to a holding company connected to the acquisition. I didn't know yet what his role was. He paused. Or what yours was. I don't have a role. He looked at her steadily. You're here, he said, which means you have a role whether you chose one or not. There was a knock at the door, and a young man came in with a tray. Soup, bread, a glass of water. He set it on the table near Elena without meeting her eyes and left. Elena didn't touch the soup. What do you know about Holloway's finances? Dominic said. I know he has money. He has a lot of it. He was careful about keeping it separate from anything joint between us. I noticed that the prenup was aggressive in ways I thought were standard, but looking back, she stopped. Why do I feel like I'm being interrogated? Because I'm trying to understand something quickly, and I need information to do it. What are you trying to understand? He turned away from the whiteboard and looked at her directly. The necklace, he said. The crest on the pendant. I need you to let me look at it. Elena's hand went to it. Reflex again, the same reflex in the rain. You keep coming back to it. Yes. Why? He was quiet for a moment, not evasive. She got the sense that evasion wasn't in his operating vocabulary, that he was simply considering how to structure something accurately. Because I saw that crest once before, he said, 23 years ago, on a document I was not supposed to see, and the family whose symbol it was disappeared shortly after. The fire popped. Elena looked at the pendant in her fingers. The crest was small, detailed. She had tried to research it twice over the years and come up empty, which she had attributed to its being a private family emblem rather than anything in a public heraldic registry. A stylized bird of some kind, wings folded, a single letter beneath it that might have been a V or might have been a design element. What family? She said. Valieri, Dominic said. She didn't recognize it. She said so. You wouldn't, he said. They were erased carefully. He crossed to the table and sat across from her, and for the first time he was close enough that she could see the specific quality of his attention, the way he watched things, not with the performative focus of someone who wanted to appear engaged, but with the actual thing, the kind of focus that came from years of needing to read rooms correctly because the cost of misreading was high. Tell me about your mother. She died 6 years ago. Before that, Elena exhaled. She raised me alone. We moved a lot when I was a child. I never really got an explanation for that. She worked in accounting, different firms, never stayed anywhere long. She didn't talk about family. She told me her parents were dead and she'd been an only child, and I believed her because there was no evidence to the contrary. She paused. When she died, she left me the necklace and a letter that told me not to look into where it came from, that the less I knew, the safer I'd be. Something shifted in Dominic's expression. What did you do with the letter? I kept it. I didn't follow the advice. Did you find anything? Nothing. Hit dead ends everywhere. Gave up after about 8 months. She watched him. Why does any of this matter tonight? Because Holloway knew who you were before he met you. The room was very quiet. That's not possible, Elena said, slowly, testing the sentence as she said it, listening to it. The acquisition attempt on the port companies, the holding company Holloway is connected to, it's the same structure that's been quietly buying up assets connected to Valieri estate holdings for 11 years. Property in 3 states, a shipping interest in Baltimore, a dormant trust account in Delaware that no one has successfully attached a living beneficiary to. He leaned forward slightly. Someone has been liquidating a dead family's assets for over a decade, and the person running that operation needed one more piece to complete the transfer of the largest portion, a direct lineage claim. Someone with Valieri blood signing off. Elena stared at him. The wedding, she said. Hearing it as she said it, the architecture of it clicking into place with a sound like something locking. He needed me to sign something. There was a prenuptial addendum. I had someone pull the filing from the attorney of record this afternoon. Dominic opened one of the laptops and turned it to face her. Page 7. The inheritance clause. She read it. She read it twice. The language was buried in the way that expensive legal language buries things. Clause 44, subsection C, a provision that appeared at first reading to be a standard asset protection measure, but on the second reading was something else entirely. A beneficiary transfer, contingent on marriage. naming a trust she had never heard of. "He had me sign this," she said. Her voice was flat. "You signed the prenup 4 weeks ago. Your signature on page 1 activates the clause on page 7. Dominic closed the laptop. "When did he start asking about your family history?" Elena's jaw tightened. "Third date." Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then the door opened and a man came in without knocking. Late 40s, heavy-set, wearing the expression of someone who had interrupted important things before and was comfortable with the habit. He looked at Elena with undisguised assessment, not predatory, just clinical, the way you look at something you're trying to classify. "Vincent," Dominic said. Not a greeting, a containment. "She shouldn't be here," the man said. He didn't address Elena. He spoke as though she were furniture with a complicating implication. "We don't know what she is yet." "I'm a person," Elena said, "with functional hearing." Vincent looked at her then, direct and unapologetic. "Who brought you here?" "He did." She indicated Dominic. "That was a decision made in the field without full information." Vincent looked at Dominic. "The Cabretti people are already talking. Someone saw the convoy stop on 56th. There are questions about why you picked up a civilian." "She's not a civilian," Dominic said. "We don't know what she is." "I just told you what she is." "You told me a theory." Dominic looked at his cousin. Elena had placed the relationship from the shorthand of it, the particular texture of tension that only came from people who had known each other long enough to dispense with pretext. And the look was level and final. "Get the Villieri documentation from the archive. Everything we have, tonight." Vincent's jaw worked. He looked at Elena again, that same classifying look, and she met it without flinching because she had spent the last 11 months learning to hold eye contact with men who thought their certainty outweighed her presence. He left without responding. "He's not wrong to be cautious," Dominic said after. "I know," Elena said. "He's wrong to be rude, but the caution is reasonable." She picked up the bread from the tray. She hadn't meant to eat, but her body had its own logic, and the twins' logic overrode hers, and ate it methodically. "What happens now?" "Now we find out what we actually know versus what we think we know." He paused. "I want to run a DNA panel. With your consent. There are markers we can test for that would confirm or eliminate a Villieri lineage connection." "Tonight?" "I have a lab contact who can turn preliminary results in 18 hours. Elena looked at the fire. It was a good fire, Tsa. Someone had built it to last. Substantial logs. A real draw. She had a sudden wave of exhaustion so complete it was almost structural, like something in her skeleton had been quietly dissolving for hours and had finally given way. "You have a lot of resources for someone investigating a port acquisition," she said. "The port acquisition is not all I do. I know what you do. Then you know I'm effective at finding things. I know you're effective at things that are often illegal." She looked at him. "I'm not going to pretend I don't know what the Falcone name means because you're being polite to me." Something moved in his face. It might have been almost respect. "Fair," he said. "If I give you a DNA sample and your results say what you think they'll say, what does that mean for me? Concretely? Concretely, it means you have a legal claim to assets that have been fraudulently transferred over the past 11 years. It also means you become considerably more valuable to the people who've been conducting those transfers, and their response to that will need to be managed." "Managed," she repeated. "Protected," he said. Correcting himself, she thought, with some precision. Elena reached up and unclasped the necklace. She held it in her palm for a moment, the weight of it negligible and enormous at once, and then she set it on the table between them. "Run the test," she said. "And while you're doing that, I want everything you have on Grant Holloway. Not a summary. Everything." Dominic looked at the necklace on the table between them. He looked at it the way you look at something you've been trying to find for a very long time when you're not entirely certain that finding it is going to be good. "Agreed," he said. The next hours moved in the particular compressed rhythm of a night when too much is happening and none of it can be slowed down. Elena was given a room. She refused to go to sleep, so she was given a room and a chair and access to the documents Dominic's team was pulling on Holloway. which arrived in waves as the night deepened, printed and stacked, his researchers moving through the house with the focused quiet of people who knew better than to be loud when Dominic was working. She read, "The picture that assembled itself was not the picture of a man who had fallen in love with the wrong woman or made a desperate financial decision. It was the picture of a man who had been positioned. Grant Holloway had inherited his initial capital from a foundation with opaque origins, had built his investment portfolio through a series of transactions that, read individually, looked like sophisticated risk-taking, and read collectively looked like a roadmap drawn by someone else. The port acquisition was the latest move in a sequence that went back 9 years, and threading through the margins of multiple transactions, appearing and disappearing, was a holding company registered in Delaware, Mercer Capital Consolidated. Elena didn't recognize the name. She wrote it down. At 2 a.m, Dominic came to the doorway of her room and looked at the stack of documents she'd been working through and said, "You should sleep." "I found something," she said. He came in. She showed him the Mercer Capital references. His face went very still in a way she was beginning to recognize. Not blankness, but the thing that happened when information landed somewhere deep and important, and he was deciding how to handle what it meant. "You know that name," she said. He didn't answer immediately. "Dominic." She said his name with the intention of being heard. "You know that name." "Silas Mercer," he said. Quiet. "Yes, I know it." "Who is he?" "A philanthropist, publicly. He runs 3 foundations, has a seat on the board of a hospital group, gives significant amounts to infrastructure charities." He paused. "Privately, he's the reason 2 of my father's closest allies were dead before I turned 20. The fire had died down to embers. The room was cooler. "You think he's behind this?" Elena said. "All of it." "I think the shape of it is his." He looked at the documents. "Mercer doesn't do anything directly. He builds structures. He positions people. He's been doing it for 30 years, and almost nothing has ever been traced back to him because by the time anything becomes traceable, the person who could confirm it is either dead or has reasons not to speak. Like Grant. Grant is a piece, not the architect." Elena sat with that for a moment. The twins were quiet, both of them, settled in the way they settled when she'd been still for a long time. She was aware of a particular feeling. Not fear, not quite, something more specific than fear. The feeling of understanding that the scale of a thing is larger than you initially calculated. That the mistake or the trap or the situation you thought was about you is actually about something that was already in motion before you were born. "My mother," she said. "She knew." "Yes," Dominic said. "I think she did. And she spent my entire childhood running from it." He didn't confirm it or deny it. He let her reach it at her own pace. "The adoption files," she said. "You mentioned sealed files. My team is pulling them now. There are records in 3 states that were sealed under court order in the early 90s. I have a contact at the records office in—" He stopped. His phone vibrated. He looked at it. His face changed. Not the subtle recalibration she'd been watching all night. Something more immediate. Something that tightened the set of his shoulders and altered his breathing in a way she caught because she'd been watching him for hours. "What?" she said. Not a question. He turned the phone so she could see the screen. It was a message from someone in his network, 3 lines, and the last line read, "Preliminary genetic panel. Expedited sample cross-reference against Falcone archive blood work. One of the twins carries markers consistent with Falcone lineage." Elena read it twice. "That's not possible," she said. Her voice was very even. "You and I have never met before tonight." "No," Dominic said. "We haven't." "Then how—" "Someone used stored genetic material," he said. "Without consent, without knowledge." He set the phone down. "Elena, someone engineered this." The silence between them had a different texture now. It had weight and direction, like a current. "Both of us," she said, slowly. "They used both of us." "They built a child capable of connecting 2 bloodlines," Dominic said. The Valieri inheritance and the Falcone name. One heir who could claim both. He looked at her, and for the first time since the intersection on 56th Street, she saw something in his face that wasn't controlled. Something raw underneath the structure of him, something that might have been fury or might have been grief, or was probably both at once. Whoever did this has been planning it for 20 years. Elena's hand was on her stomach. She didn't remember putting it there. Outside, somewhere in the dark beyond the limestone wall, a car alarm went off and stopped. Dogs, somewhere distant. The particular silence of a guarded house at 2 a.m, pressed on all sides by a world that did not know what was happening inside it. Vincent's going to say I did this, she said. Vincent is going to say a lot of things. Is he going to be wrong? Dominic looked at her. You were a target, the same as I was. He picked up his phone again, and she could see from the way his thumb moved that he was sending multiple messages at once. What's coming next is going to be loud. People are going to make assumptions. The families I work with are going to hear that there's a child connected to the Falcone bloodline, and they're going to want answers, and the answers are going to be complicated, and some of them are going to decide that complicated is the same as dangerous. He looked up. I need to know that you understand what that means. It means someone has been building a trap for both of us for 20 years, Elena said, and we just walked into the last room of it. He held her gaze. From downstairs, Vincent's voice, not words, just the register of it, rising. Then a second voice Elena didn't recognize. Then a third. Dominic stood. Stay here, he said. He left the room. Elena sat alone with the dying fire and the documents and her hand on her stomach and the knowledge, settling through her like cold water, slow and comprehensive, that the woman she had believed herself to be for 31 years was built on something someone else had constructed, that her mother had known and run and ultimately failed to outrun it, that Grant Holloway had been a mechanism, that the children she was carrying had been designed as an instrument before she even knew she was pregnant, and somewhere below her, voices were rising in the house of the man she had ridden here with in the rain, the man whose name was on the genetic panel that had just detonated everything. She looked at the phone on the table. Not hers. One of Dominic's researchers had left it when they brought the latest document batch, a spare, unlocked. She picked it up. She searched Silas Mercer. What came back was exactly what Dominic had described. The public face of a philanthropist, the foundation websites, the hospital board photograph, the gala appearances. A man of 71 who looked like someone's careful grandfather, silver-haired, slim, the kind of man who gave the commencement address at universities and received honorary degrees and had his name on the side of a children's wing in a hospital in Philadelphia. She scrolled further, found a photograph from 18 years ago. A fundraising dinner. Mercer in the center of a group of men in evening wear, smiling, the practiced smile of a man comfortable with cameras. To his right, arm around his shoulder, laughing at something off-frame. A younger man, dark-haired, lean. Elena looked at the face for a long time. Then she heard a sound from downstairs that was not voices, something harder, something final. And then Dominic's voice saying one sharp word she couldn't make out, and then silence. She set the phone face down on the table. In the photograph on the screen, 18 years younger and laughing at something off-frame, was a man whose face she had not recognized until this moment and now could not stop seeing. Her father. The man her mother had told her was dead before Elena was born. Standing arm in arm with Silas Mercer, alive and smiling. She sat with the phone face down on the table for 43 seconds. She counted them. Not deliberately. Her brain did it without permission, the way it had always processed shock, converting it into measurement, into the manageable arithmetic of seconds passing, each one evidence that time was still moving and therefore she was still inside it. Then she picked the phone back up and looked at the photograph again. Her father's face. She had one photograph of him, had carried it in her wallet since she was 19, transferred it from wallet to wallet across 12 years. A 2x3 print gone soft at the corners from handling. Her mother had given it to her on her 19th birthday with the explanation that it was the only one she had, and that he had died in an accident before Elena was born, and that there was nothing more to say about it. Elena had believed this with the completeness that children believe the foundational facts of their lives. Not because she'd examined the evidence, but because the alternative had seemed too large to hold. The man in the photograph on the phone was younger than the image in her wallet by maybe 5 years, but the jaw was the same. The particular angle of the shoulders, the way he stood with his weight slightly forward, like someone always on the edge of moving. Alive. 18 years ago. Laughing. Standing next to the man who had, if Dominic was right, spent 2 decades engineering the destruction of every person connected to 2 specific bloodlines. She put the phone down again. Her hand was shaking and she looked at it with a kind of detached interest, the way you observe a physical symptom before you've connected it to its cause. The tremor was fine, in the fingertips, and it moved up through her wrist and she closed her hand into a fist and pressed it against her knee until it stopped. Downstairs, the silence had been replaced by something worse than voices. The particular acoustic quality of a large space where people were moving with controlled urgency. Footsteps. Doors. The low exchange of men communicating in clipped, functional sentences. Elena stood up. She was not going to sit in a room and wait to be informed. The staircase was wide and curved, and she descended it with one hand on the rail and her eyes on the activity below. 3 men she didn't know crossing the ground floor entry with the compressed body language of people responding to a threat, not executing a plan. Vincent was visible through the open door of the main corridor, on his phone, his free hand pressed flat against the wall beside him in a posture she read as someone keeping himself from doing something he'd regret. Dominic was in the entry hall. He was looking at something on his phone, and when he heard her on the stairs, he looked up, and the expression on his face told her that whatever had happened in the last 8 minutes was significant. "I told you to stay upstairs," he said. "I found something," she said. "I'll tell you what it is after you tell me what happened down here." He looked at her for a moment, something assessed and concluded in a fraction of a second. "Someone accessed our internal network," he said, "pulled the DNA panel results and the Valieri documentation before we'd secured the channel. It was a targeted extraction. Specific files, in and out in under 4 minutes." He paused. "Whoever we're dealing with has been inside our system before. They knew exactly where to look. Which means they know what the panel said." "Yes." "Which means they know about the lineage connection." "Yes." Elena came the rest of the way down the stairs. "I need to show you something." She held out the phone with the photograph open. He took it. She watched his face as he looked at it. The stillness she'd seen twice before tonight, deeper this time, settling into something that wasn't controlled so much as it was simply too large for expression. "Where did you get this?" "Internet search on Mercer. It's in the public record. A charity gala image from 18 years ago." She pointed at the figure beside Mercer. "That's my father, who my mother told me was dead before I was born." Dominic looked at the photograph for a long time. "His name isn't in the caption." "I know." "But you're certain?" "I have one photograph of him. Same jaw, same posture." She heard her own voice doing the flat mechanical thing it did when emotion was too large to carry directly. "I'm certain." Dominic handed the phone back and turned toward the study. "Vincent," he said. Not loud, just said it. Vincent appeared from the corridor with the efficiency of someone who'd been close enough to hear everything. "Run facial recognition on the gala photograph from the phone. Cross-reference against every database we have access to, every alias structure connected to Mercer Capital, anything involving the Valieri family network pre-1995. Dominic looked at Vincent, and the look between them was not the fraught tension of 2 hours ago, but something more functional. 2 people who had set aside their argument because the situation had superseded it. "And pull the hospital records for the fertility clinic that handled Elena's prenatal care." Elena's head came up. "Why?" "The genetic panel," Dominic said. "If the Falcone markers were introduced through fertility fraud, the clinic is the access point. Someone with medical credentials performed a procedure on you, a real procedure, documented, and altered it." He looked at her steadily. "When did you start care with your current OB?" 8 weeks. I was 8 weeks when I went in." "Before that? When you first confirmed the pregnancy?" She thought about it, the sequence of it. "I used a home test at 6 weeks. Then I went to a clinic. Not my regular doctor. I didn't have a regular OB yet. Grant suggested a place. He said he had a colleague who... She stopped. She felt the floor of the situation drop out. He suggested the clinic, she said. Yes, Dominic said, with the tone of a man who had already concluded this and was waiting for her to catch up, not impatiently, but with the specific gravity of someone confirming a diagnosis they'd hoped was wrong. The first confirmation appointment, Elena said. They did a more extensive panel than I expected. I thought it was because I was going to be over 35 at delivery, and they were being thorough. Her voice had gone completely flat. They said it was standard. It wasn't standard, Dominic said. They were introducing the material and documenting it simultaneously, creating a paper trail that looked like routine prenatal genetics while... He stopped. While engineering my children, Elena said. The word engineering in her own mouth was the worst thing. More than the photographs, more than the wedding, more than Grant's face at the altar, because everything else had been done to her life, to her circumstances, to her choices. This had been done to her body, without her knowledge, without her consent, to children she was already carrying, children who had been converted into instruments before they were born. She sat down on the bottom stair because her legs decided that standing was no longer the right structural choice. Nobody said anything. Vincent had already moved back toward the study. The three men she didn't know had gone somewhere. The house was quiet in the way that houses get quiet when everyone in them is processing the same information and none of them has a response adequate to it. I need water, Elena said. Someone brought it. She didn't see who. She drank it, and then she stood back up because she was not going to mourn on a staircase. She was going to move, and movement required standing. The clinic, she said. What's the name of it? You don't remember? I remember the street. I don't remember the specific name. She looked at Dominic. It was on Lexington, 63rd or 64th, glass front, a waiting room with gray chairs. Variant Women's Health, said a voice from the study doorway. Not Vincent. Someone else. A younger man, early 30s, slim, wearing glasses and the exhausted alertness of someone who had been at a screen for hours. He had a laptop open in his hand and was reading from it. Registered 2019, one of 3 medical facilities owned through a holding company called Serrano Medical Group. He looked up. Serrano Medical Group is a subsidiary of Mercer Capital Consolidated. The name landed in the room like something thrown. Dominic turned to the young man. Keen, everything you have on Variant, board members, lead physicians, any staff with access to genetic material storage. And I need the original filing on the Serrano Group, who signed the incorporation documents. Keen was already moving. Elena watched him go and felt the architecture of the past 9 months rearranging itself. Every appointment, every routine panel, every blood draw described as standard prenatal monitoring. Grant, suggesting the clinic with the ease of a man making a recommendation, not a man executing a step in a plan he'd been given. Because Grant wasn't the architect. Grant was the mechanism. He had been told where to direct her, and he had directed her, and the people at that clinic had done the rest, and the rest had been done to cells and chromosomes and the private biological interior of her body, while she sat in a gray-chaired waiting room and read pregnancy magazines and believed herself to be a person exercising reasonable choices about her own medical care. She was going to need to hold the fury somewhere manageable, or it was going to overwhelm everything she needed to do next. Where's Cassie? Elena said suddenly. Dominic looked at her. My friend. My matron of honor. She was at the wedding. She doesn't know where I am. She looked at her hands. I left without telling anyone anything. She'll be... Do you have a number for her? I have it memorized. Elena took Keen's abandoned phone from the doorway table and dialed. It rang 3 times. Cassie picked up on the 4th ring with, Elena. Oh my God, where are you? I've been calling your phone for 3 hours. I'm safe, Elena said. I'm not going to be able to tell you where right now. I need you to do something for me. A pause. Okay? Go home. Don't go to Grant's. Don't go anywhere we both know together. If anyone asks you where I am, you don't know. She kept her voice level. Cassie, this is serious. I know it's serious, Elena. I watched him do that at the... It's more serious than the wedding, Elena said. I need you to trust me. Go home and stay there, and don't talk to anyone about me until I call you. Can you do that? A long pause this time. Then, yes. Good. She hung up. When she turned around, Vincent was in the corridor behind her. He had his phone in his hand, and his expression had changed. The clinical assessment from earlier was still there, but something had been added to it, something that looked like the very early stages of a recalibration he resented having to make. The facial recognition came back, he said. He wasn't looking at Elena. He was looking at Dominic. The man in the photograph with Mercer. He's in the system. Name, Dominic said. He has 4. The one we found first, the one attached to his earliest documented appearance in the Valieri network, is Marco Valieri. Vincent paused. The pause was doing work, containing something. He's not dead. He's been operating under a protected identity since 1998, currently living under the name David Crane, residential address in Connecticut. Elena heard the name her mother had given her father, Marco. She had never known his first name. Her mother had refused to say it. He's 45 minutes away, Vincent said. He was still looking at Dominic, not at Elena. She understood why before she understood it consciously, and the understanding arrived in her chest like something cold. You're not going to tell me, she said. Vincent finally looked at her. The address? She said. You're not going to give it to me. That decision is, if you say not yours to make, I will make your evening considerably more difficult, Elena said. Her voice came out with an edge she hadn't manufactured. It arrived naturally, ground from everything the night had deposited in her. He is my father. He is alive when I was told he was dead. He has been 45 minutes away, apparently, for... How long? Vincent said nothing. How long? She repeated. We don't have the full timeline yet, Dominic said. Not to deflect. He wasn't a deflector. She'd established that, to be accurate. But based on the identity documentation, the protected status in the Connecticut records goes back at least 16 years. 16 years. Elena had been 15 when her mother had packed them up for the last time, moved them from Chicago to a one-bedroom in Newark, told her it was for work, looked exhausted and watchful in a way that 15-year-old Elena had categorized as depression, and now recategorized as something else entirely. Her mother had been running from a man who was 45 minutes from where Elena was standing right now. I want to see him, she said. That's not, Vincent started. Vincent, Dominic said it quietly. One word. Vincent stopped. Dominic looked at Elena. If we go to him directly, without knowing whether he's compromised, we tip our hand to Mercer's network. If Mercer's people are monitoring him, which, given that he's a protected asset operating under a false identity, they may well be, we lead them directly to you. Then we find out first whether he's compromised. That takes time. How much time do you think we have before whoever pulled the files from your network uses what they found? She held his gaze. They know about the Falcone markers now. They know the lineage connection is documented. Whatever the plan was before tonight just changed because they know we know, and every hour we wait is an hour they're moving and we're standing in your entry hall. Dominic was quiet for a moment. Reading her, she let him read. All right, he said, but we do it my way. The convoy left the estate at 3:40 in the morning, 2 vehicles. Dominic in the lead SUV with Elena and a man named Rourke, who said nothing and held a position between Elena and the door that told her everything she needed to know about his function. Vincent in the second vehicle with Keene and 2 others. The Connecticut address resolved into a neighborhood of mid-century houses on quarter-acre lots, the kind of suburb that had been built for one kind of American life and had quietly kept delivering it through all the decades since. Mature trees, low fences, porch lights left on. The house was a Cape Cod style, pale yellow, a light on in a downstairs room. They stopped a block away. Dominic's phone lit with a message from Keene. No surveillance vehicles identified. No electronic monitoring on the exterior. 2 heat signatures inside the structure. Elena looked at that. 2, she said. He's not alone, Dominic said. Or it's a different person entirely, and we have the wrong address. We don't have the wrong address. Rourke went first, walking the perimeter of the block with the unhurried ease of a man out for an early walk in the dark, which no reasonable person would have found convincing, but which provided them 4 minutes of confirmation that the approach was clear. He returned and nodded once. They walked to the front door. Dominic knocked. There was a long wait, long enough that Elena measured it, the way she'd measured the seconds with the photograph, and got to 11 before the light through the front window shifted and footsteps approached. The door opened. The man was 63, white-haired now, but with the remnant architecture of the face she'd been looking at for 12 years in a soft-cornered photograph. He had put on weight and lost some height to age and was wearing a flannel robe, and looked at Elena with the expression of a man whose worst nightmare had just arrived at his front door at 3:40 in the morning, which, she supposed, was accurate. "Elena," he said, just her name. No performance of surprise. He had known this was coming, not tonight specifically, but always, in the back of every day for however many years. And he was not going to insult either of them by pretending otherwise. "David Crane," she said, "or Marco Valieri. I'll accept either." He stepped back from the door. They went in. The interior of the house was ordinary in the specific way of people who have given up on wanting things and settled for function. Comfortable furniture, nothing personal displayed. The house of someone who had been careful never to accumulate the kind of objects that could be used to find or understand them. No photographs, no art. Books, yes, stacked practically, read rather than displayed. There was a woman in the kitchen doorway, early 60s, in a robe, watching with an expression Elena couldn't read and didn't have time for. "She needs to go upstairs," Dominic said. Quiet, not cruel. Marco, Elena couldn't call him anything else in her own mind. Marco, the name her mother had refused to speak, looked at the woman with an apology in his face that had the weight of a very long-standing debt. The woman looked at Elena for one moment, then went upstairs without a word. They sat in the living room. Dominic and Rourke stood. Vincent had come in behind them and positioned himself near the front door. Elena sat across from her father. She had imagined this. She'd had years to imagine it. The conversation with the dead man who wasn't, the accounting she would demand, the explanation she would require. She had imagined fury. She had imagined grief. What she had not imagined was the sensation of looking at a stranger and finding, underneath the strangeness, something recognizable in the most basic biological way, the way your body knows a thing before your mind has processed it. She didn't reach for him. She put her hands in her lap. "Mercer," she said, "tell me how long you've worked for him." Marco closed his eyes, just for a second, then opened them. "I don't work for him," he said. His voice was the voice of someone who had been given years to rehearse how they would say the difficult things. It had that quality. Prepared, but not quite practiced enough to sound natural. "I worked with him, in the beginning, before I understood what he was building." "What was he building?" "A consolidation," Marco said. "That's what he called it in 1999, when he first approached my family. A consolidation of the two largest unaffiliated criminal networks in the eastern United States. The Valieri family controlled substantial legitimate assets, real estate, shipping, import infrastructure, that Mercer wanted access to. And the Falcone family." He looked at Dominic. His eyes held something careful and long ago. "Your father refused him in 1997, directly. Told him no, and told him to stay out of Falcone territory. And then my father had two dead allies," Dominic said. Marco said nothing, which was confirmation. "You were the inside contact," Dominic said. His voice was level in the way that level voices are when they are containing something that needs to be contained. "You gave Mercer access to my father's network structure." "I was 26, Marco said. I'm not interested in the explanation," Dominic said. "I'm interested in what you know now." Marco looked at Elena. This was interesting. He kept returning to her face the way a compass returns to north, and she couldn't tell yet whether it was guilt or something else. "Mercer told me the consolidation required a lineage connection," Marco said. "Someone who could inherit legitimately from both families. A child. He said he needed a Valieri heir who could be positioned alongside a Falcone connection. I told him that was insane. That I wasn't going to—" He stopped, pressed his hands together between his knees. "He told me he didn't need my permission." The room was very still. "What did he do?" Elena said. Her voice was quiet, quieter than she intended. "He arranged your mother's pregnancy," Marco said, "without her knowledge, without mine. We were together. Your mother and I, we were together for 2 years before she knew what my family was. And when she found out she was already pregnant and Mercer's people were already... He stopped again, started differently. She didn't know until after you were born that the pregnancy had been interfered with, that the initial consultation she'd had at a clinic in Chicago had been compromised, altered. Elena stared at him. She found out when you were 3 months old, Marco said. She left the same night, took you and ran. I helped her. It was the only useful thing I did. I gave her the resources to disappear, and I removed myself from anything that could connect her to me. He looked at his hands. Mercer let her go because he needed her to raise you to adulthood. A dead heir was no use to him. A living one, mature, capable of signing documents and holding legal standing. She was never free, Elena said. No. She spent my entire childhood running from something she never told me about, because telling me would have put you in more danger. Yes. Elena sat with that, the fire of it, the particular quality of grief that came from understanding that the protection you'd been given had also been a kind of erasure. She gave me the necklace, Elena said. When she was dying, she said it was mine. She said it had always been mine. Marco looked at the silver pendant at Elena's throat, and his expression broke, very briefly, before he reassembled it. It was the Valieri crest. She kept it because she thought, someday when it was safe, you might want to know what you came from. His voice had gone rough. It was never safe. You've been here 16 years, Elena said, 45 minutes from New York. Did you know about Grant Holloway? Marco was quiet for too long. Answer me, she said. I knew there was a positioning happening, he said. I heard through contacts that Mercer was activating the second phase. I didn't know Holloway's name specifically. I didn't know the timeline. His eyes came up to hers. I knew something was coming, and I didn't warn you, and I have been sitting in this house telling myself that no contact was the safest choice, and I have been wrong about that every single day. Elena stood up. She stood up because she needed to be moving, and the room was too small for what was in her chest. She walked to the window. Outside, the street was empty and dark and ordinary. A dog barked somewhere and stopped. The twins, she said, without turning around. Did you know about that? No. Marco's voice was certain in a way the rest hadn't been, stripped down to the actual thing. No, that's... If Mercer introduced a Falcone genetic marker to your children, a pause. That's a step beyond anything he discussed in my presence. That's a new structure entirely. A new structure for what? Dominic said. Marco looked at him. And in his face, Elena saw, even from across the room, with her back partially turned, the specific expression of a man about to say the thing that changes everything. He's dying, Marco said. Mercer. He has a terminal diagnosis, face pancreatic, 18 months at most. The rumors in his network have been consistent for 6 months. He's been accelerating everything. He doesn't have time for the long game anymore. He looked at Elena, then at Dominic. He needs the consolidation completed before he dies. A child carrying both bloodlines, named heir to a combined estate, would represent the single largest transfer of unified criminal and legitimate assets in the history of organized crime in this country. He paused. And he intends to trigger it before he can't. Dominic said nothing. He needs Elena alive and cooperative, Marco said, or he needs Elena incapacitated and replaced by a legal guardian of his choosing. Those are the two options his network has been preparing for simultaneously. His eyes went to Elena's abdomen, the twins, the impossible engineered connection, and the look in them was something she had no clean word for, being simultaneously the look of a man confronting his own culpability and the look of a grandfather who had never expected to have cause to be one. He's going to move soon, Marco said. The network breached tonight, pulling your files, that's the signal. He's given the order. Whatever you're planning, you have less time than you think. The front door opened. Rourke was inside before Elena heard the sound. Her body moved. She turned, stepped back from the window, her hands going to her stomach. And Dominic was already in motion across the room, not toward the door but toward her, positioning himself between her and the entrance with a fluidity that had nothing practiced about it and everything instinctive. Vincent was on the floor. He had been at the door. He was on the floor now, not shot, not bleeding. Sedated, Elena realized, the particular limpness of it, the way his phone had skidded from his hand. The man standing in the open doorway was thin, mid-50s, in a dark jacket, holding a device Elena recognized belatedly as a directed acoustic suppressor, non-lethal, expensive, law enforcement, or above. He looked at the room with the methodical attention of someone executing a step in a sequence. "Mr. Falcone," the man said, "my employer would like to meet Miss Ashcroft." His eyes moved to Elena. "He's prepared to offer terms." "Your employer," Dominic said, "can—" "He's also prepared to offer information," the man said. "Specifically, the location of the clinic's genetic archive, the complete records of every procedure performed in conjunction with Ms. Ashcroft's prenatal care, including the chain of authorization." He paused. "Including the signature on the authorization." He looked at Elena. "The person who signed the authorization for the genetic modification of your children," the man said, "is someone you've trusted." Elena looked at him. "The signature belongs to Cassie Wren," he said. "Your matron of honor, your closest friend." The room did not move. Elena's face did not move. But something in the deepest interior of her, something that had been holding on through the wedding and the rain and the photographs and her father alive and everything, something there let go. It didn't announce itself. It didn't arrive as tears or sound. It arrived as a kind of absolute zero, a temperature drop in the center of her chest that spread outward through her ribs and into her arms and settled in her hands, which she looked at and did not recognize for a moment as her own. Cassie. Cassie, who had stood in the bridal suite 2 hours before the ceremony with sparkling water and an expression working too hard at cheerful. Cassie, who had asked, "Are you sure about Grant?" Exactly once and never again. Not because she'd accepted Elena's answer, but because she already knew the answer didn't matter. Cassie, who had picked up the phone 40 minutes ago and said yes with the ease of someone who had been waiting for the call. Go home and stay there. She had sent her home. She had told her to stay put and not talk to anyone. She had given her time. "You're lying," Elena said. The words came out without weight, not defensive. She wasn't defending Cassie, wasn't reaching for the comfortable version. She was testing the claim the way she tested everything now, structurally, looking for the load-bearing walls. "The clinic maintains digital authorization records," the man said. "The signature is biometric. It cannot be forged." "It can be stolen," Dominic said. "You're welcome to verify it." The man reached into his jacket and produced a drive, held it out. "My employer anticipated your skepticism. This contains the full authorization chain, every access log, every timestamp." His eyes stayed on Elena. "Ms. Wren has had access to your medical history since before you met Grant Holloway. She introduced you." Elena's mind went back and found it immediately. The specific memory with the particular clarity that significant memories have when you finally understand what they were. A rooftop party. In October, 4 years ago, Cassie's hand on her arm. "You have to meet this guy, Elena. He's exactly your type. Just talk to him." She had laughed. She had talked to him. Dominic took the drive without approaching the man. Rourke intercepted it, checked it, passed it to Keene, who had appeared from somewhere with his laptop already open. 40 seconds. Keene looked up. His face said everything before his mouth did. "It's real," he said. Elena looked at her father across the room. Marco Valieri, who had spent 16 years 45 minutes away, sat with his hands between his knees and his eyes on his daughter and did not say a word because there was nothing adequate and he knew it. She looked at Dominic. "I need a phone," she said. Her voice was completely steady. "And I need you to have people at Cassie's address in the next 10 minutes. She held Dominic's gaze. "Because if she runs, we lose everything she knows, and I am not losing anything else tonight." Dominic looked at her for 1 second, reading her the way he'd been reading her since 56th Street, and whatever he found was sufficient. "Rourke," he said. They moved. Cassie's apartment was on the fourth floor of a pre-war building in Astoria, 12 minutes from the Queensboro Bridge at 4 in the morning when there was no traffic and Rourke drove the way he drove everything, with the particular controlled aggression of someone who understood that speed and precision were not opposites. Elena sat in the back seat and did not look out the window. She looked at her hands. She had stopped measuring seconds. She had moved past the part of the night where measurement was useful and into the part where the only thing that mattered was sequence. What happened first, what happened next, what the shape of the next 10 minutes needed to be. Dominic was on the phone beside her, low and rapid, issuing instructions she only half processed. Teams repositioning, someone named Garrett being woken up, a federal contact whose name he didn't say aloud. He had the phone pressed hard against his ear, and his free hand was flat on his knee, and she could see the tension in it, the deliberate stillness of a man keeping his hands from doing what they wanted to do. "She'll run," Elena said. Not to him specifically, just said it. "Maybe," Dominic said between calls. "She knows I called her from a phone that wasn't mine. She knows I'm with someone. She's been operational long enough to understand what that means. My people are already at her building. Are they inside?" A beat. "Not yet." Then she might already be gone. Elena looked at the window finally, the dark blur of Queens moving past. She's smart. She's been smart for 4 years at minimum, probably longer. She knew exactly how to stay close without being visible. She heard her own voice doing the flat thing and let it. She came to the wedding. She stood in the bridal suite with me before it happened, and she knew what Grant was going to do, and she stood there and handed me sparkling water. Dominic said nothing. "What kind of person does that?" Elena said. It wasn't a question that wanted an answer, and he didn't give it one. The building on 31st Street had 2 entrances and a service exit in the back that Rourke had pulled from a building schematic in the 3 minutes of driving time they'd had. One of Dominic's men, a compact, silent individual named Bass, who had appeared from somewhere Elena hadn't tracked, went around the back before they reached the front door. The lobby had a buzzer panel and a night security camera, and a man behind a desk who looked up from his phone with the expression of someone about to deliver a policy statement about visitor hours. Dominic placed something on the desk without breaking stride. Elena didn't see what it was. The man behind the desk looked at it and did not deliver his policy statement. The elevator was old and slow. They took the stairs. 4th floor. The corridor was carpeted in green, a long, straight run of identical doors, sconce lights burning low. 4F was at the end. Elena went first. She did this deliberately. Dominic's hand came out, not grabbing, just present, a check, and she moved past it. If Cassie looked through the peephole and saw Dominic or Rourke, she would know. If she saw Elena, she might open the door on reflex, on 4 years of reflex, before her operational brain overrode the personal one. Elena knocked. She stood directly in front of the peephole. She kept her face neutral. She was 6 months pregnant in a borrowed sweater at 4 in the morning, and she stood in the corridor and knocked again and said, "Cassie, it's me. Open the door." 15 seconds. 20. Then the sound of a chain being moved and a deadbolt turning, and the door opened 4 inches. Cassie's eye in the gap. Her face beyond it, pale, no makeup, dressed in street clothes, not sleepwear, which confirmed everything. She had been getting ready to move, had been in the process when they arrived, had not quite finished. She saw Elena's face. She saw what was behind Elena's face. And in the 4 inches of open door, Elena watched her oldest friend perform the fastest internal calculation she had ever witnessed on another human being. The calculation of someone deciding whether the version of the situation they had prepared for was the version that was actually here. It wasn't. Cassie tried to close the door. Elena put her foot in it. The impact was bad. She felt it in her ankle and up through her shin, and she didn't move it. She kept it there. And Dominic's palm hit the door flat and the chain snapped and they were inside. Cassie backed into the center of her living room. She was breathing hard. Not panicked, not quite. She was too trained for panic, but her breath was shallow and fast, and her eyes were moving across the room in the quick, systematic way of someone calculating exits. "Don't," Elena said. "Boss is at the back. Rourke is in the doorway." She stepped into the room. Her ankle hurt. She didn't adjust her gait. "Sit down." "Elena, Sit down, Cassie. Cassie sat. She chose the armchair nearest the window, which was interesting. Nearest the exit she probably still believed was available. She sat with her hands on her knees and looked at Elena with an expression that was doing something complicated, cycling through iterations too fast to track. What settled was something Elena had never seen on her face before. Not guilt. Not quite. Something more professional than guilt. The expression of someone who has been caught at a thing they were very good at and is now deciding which version of the next conversation cost them the least. How long? Elena said. Cassie said nothing. The authorization signature on the genetic modification at Variant Clinic. Your biometric. How long have you been working for Mercer? Something moved across Cassie's face. Fast. Gone. 6 years, she said. The number arrived in Elena's chest and expanded there. 6 years. They had been friends for 9, which meant there had been 3 years of actual friendship before Cassie had been recruited or approached or had gone looking. Elena didn't know which yet, and the distinction mattered. Were we ever real? Elena said. Cassie's jaw tightened. Yes, she said, and it came out with a vehemence that was the most honest thing Elena had heard from her all night, which was its own particular devastation. Then why? Because by the time I understood what I was agreeing to, I was already in it. Cassie's hands pressed harder against her knees. Mercer doesn't recruit you with the full picture. He gives you pieces. A financial problem solved here. A connection made there. By the time the picture is complete, you're... She stopped. You're what? Dominic said from behind Elena. His voice was quiet and very specific. Cassie looked at him. You know what? She said. Your family built the same kind of walls. You just built them around different people. My family didn't engineer children, Dominic said. The room went sharp. No, Cassie said. She looked at Elena. I didn't know about that part. The clinic, I was told it was a monitoring protocol. Genetic screening for Valieri lineage markers to confirm the bloodline before the legal phase activated. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. The knuckles had gone white against her knees. I signed an authorization for a screening procedure. That's what I was told it was. And you believe that, Elena said. I believed what I needed to believe. The honesty of it was brutal. Not an excuse, just the thing, stated without decoration. I'm sorry, Elena, that's real. Whatever else is or isn't, don't, Elena said. Don't do that right now. She looked at Cassie and the fury was back, cold, clarifying, the same fury from the altar, from the rain, but with more material behind it now, more weight. Where is Mercer? Cassie blinked. Where is he? Tonight. You knew we'd move fast once the network breach happened. You knew the timeline accelerated. Where has he positioned himself? A long pause. Cassie was calculating again. Elena could see it. The specific quality of someone deciding what information was worth trading and what the trade would cost them. The harbor terminal, Cassie said. Red Hook. He owns a logistics facility there. Legitimate front, import processing. He uses the lower levels for meetings that need security that a hotel can't provide. She paused. He's been there since yesterday. He doesn't move when he's activated an operation. He runs it from a fixed point. Dominic was already on his phone. How many people? Rourke said from the doorway. First words he'd said since Connecticut. I don't know the full count. Cassie looked at him. Enough. He pulled people from 3 networks for this. He's been expecting a response. He's been expecting me to come to him, Dominic said, off the phone now. His voice had a new quality. Not anger, past anger, into the territory beyond it where things become simply operational. That's the move he set up, the man at Marco's door, the drive with the authorization records. It was a direction. He wanted us moving toward him on his timeline. And then we changed the timeline, Elena said. Everyone looked at her. She looked at Cassie. The encrypted financial records, Mercer's network, the actual transaction architecture, the shell company chains, the authorization trails for every illegal consolidation he's run in the last decade. It exists somewhere in a form that could be transmitted. Cassie was very still. You have access to it, Elena said. That's why you're still useful to him. That's why you're still alive, Jay. People in Mercer's position don't keep operational liabilities around unless those liabilities have ongoing value. She watched Cassie's face confirm it without moving. Give me access. Elena, you said we were real. Elena stepped closer to the armchair. She was aware of the physical reality of herself. 6 months pregnant, borrowed sweater, broken night behind her, and an unknown quantity of worse things ahead. And she stood in front of the woman who had been her closest friend, and she did not soften anything. Prove it. Give me the access. The silence was long enough to breathe in. Cassie looked at Elena's face and looked at Dominic and looked at her own hands on her knees. She looked at the window, at the exit that wasn't available. She looked at the facts of the room as they had arranged themselves. My laptop, she said finally. The secondary partition. Keen was through the door in 30 seconds with equipment Elena hadn't tracked him carrying, and for the next 18 minutes the apartment was a contained operational space. Keen at Cassie's laptop, Dominic making calls in the kitchen with the door half closed, Rourke in the doorway, Bass presumably still at the building's back exit. Elena sat on the couch across from Cassie, and neither of them spoke. At 4:37, Keen looked up and said, I have it. Elena looked at what he'd found on the screen. 3 months ago, she would not have been able to read it. 3 months ago, she hadn't known what shell company architecture looked like at scale, hadn't known how to trace an authorization chain through 4 jurisdictions, hadn't spent 3 hours in the early morning reading Holloway's financial records. Now she could read it well enough to understand that what Keen had pulled was the complete backbone of everything Mercer had built. Every name, every account, every transaction with a timestamp and a signatory. Can we transmit this? She said. To whom? Keen said. Everyone, Elena said. Federal authorities, the rival networks Mercer has been manipulating, both simultaneously. She looked at Dominic in the kitchen doorway. He had stopped talking. He was watching her. If his own allied networks see the evidence of how he's been using them, the double structures, the side deals, the way he's positioned each family against the others, they turn on him. He loses his protection from inside. And the federal transmission, Dominic said carefully, forces his hand. He can't run if every agency with jurisdiction is receiving simultaneously. She held Dominic's gaze. You lose things too if this goes federal. Yes, he said. I'm telling you that directly. I heard you directly. And? A beat. His jaw set once. Send it, he said. It took Keen 11 minutes to structure the transmission package. Elena spent those 11 minutes on a phone with a number Dominic gave her, a federal contact who picked up on the second ring at 4:45 in the morning without surprise, which told her this contact had been awake and waiting for a reason, had possibly been waiting for a reason for some time. She laid it out in 4 minutes. The genetic fraud, the Valieri estate transfers, the Mercer capital structure, Varant Clinic, the authorization chain. She gave the federal contact Keen's transmission before she hung up, and she did it without asking Dominic again because he had said send it, and she was done asking for permission she'd already been granted. Cassie watched all of this from the armchair. Her expression had shifted again. The professional calculation was gone. What was there instead was something Elena had no clean word for. Looking at a person you thought you knew performing a version of themselves you had underestimated. At 5:03, Dominic's phone rang. He answered it, listened for 20 seconds, said nothing, and hung up. He looked at Rourke. Mercer's people are moving, he said. They know about the transmission. Someone in his network has a federal contact who flagged it. He looked at Elena. He's not waiting anymore. He's sending people to Marco's address in Connecticut and to this building. How long? Rourke said. 20 minutes, maybe less. Elena stood up. Her ankle was a steady pain she had been organizing around for an hour, and she was tired in every layer, physically, neurologically, in the bones, and she stood up anyway. Then we go to him, she said. Red Hook, now, before his people reach us, and before he finishes relocating. She looked at Dominic. You said he expected you to come to him on his timeline. Yes. So we go on ours. The convoy to Red Hook assembled in 4 minutes. 3 vehicles, the 2 from Connecticut, plus a third that materialized from somewhere with 2 more of Dominic's people. Elena rode in the lead vehicle, and Cassie rode in the second under Rourke's supervision. Not arrested, not free, something in between that had no official name. Marco was in the third vehicle. He had been brought from Connecticut while Elena was inside Cassie's building, transferred without ceremony into the convoy with the understanding that he was either an asset or a liability, and they hadn't finished determining which. Elena didn't look at the third vehicle. Red Hook at 5 in the morning was the particular industrial emptiness of a waterfront not yet touched by the gentrification creeping through the surrounding neighborhoods. Container yards and warehouses, and the smell of the harbor, cold and salt and diesel, the sky beginning its first gray suggestion of dawn above the water. The Mercer Logistics Facility was a concrete building running 300 feet along the waterfront, its legitimate facade a row of truck bays with roll-up doors, half of them standing open, the others dark. They stopped 2 blocks out. "There are people inside," Dominic said, looking at his phone. Keene had pulled something, thermal imaging from a source Elena didn't ask about. 14 heat signatures in the main building, 3 on the exterior perimeter. 14, Rourke said. "Mercer's in the center structure," Dominic said. "Lower level, 2 signatures with him." Elena looked at the building. The gray light was growing, very slowly, at the water's edge. She could hear the harbor, the low metal sounds of it, the water against the dock infrastructure, something mechanical running somewhere distant. "Grant's here," Keene said suddenly, looking at his screen. His phone signal just placed him inside the East Bay. Elena looked at the building. Grant Holloway, who had stood at an altar in a charcoal suit and ended her life as she had understood it, who had been a mechanism, a positioned piece, a man who had been aimed at her with the precision of something weaponized. She did not feel what she expected to feel, finding out he was here. She felt, instead, something colder and more useful than emotion. She felt information. He was here, and he was a man who knew Mercer's architecture from the inside and who was, at this particular moment, not the most dangerous person in the building and therefore potentially the most accessible. "I need to talk to Grant," she said. "Elena," Dominic said, "he's not the shooter in this. He's not the enforcer. He's the transaction man, and transactions can be renegotiated when the underlying position changes." She looked at Dominic. "Mercer's network just found out about the federal transmission. Grant is smart enough to understand what that means for his own exposure. He's in that building right now doing the math on whether Mercer's position is still worth his loyalty." Dominic looked at her for a long moment. The gray dawn was doing something to the light around them, softening the hard edges of the industrial block. And in it, his face was very tired and very awake simultaneously. "You've thought about this the whole drive," he said. "I've thought about this since Cassie's apartment," she said. "Are you going to argue with me, or are we going to move?" From inside the facility, a sound, a single sharp report, not quite a gunshot, but adjacent to one, something structural giving way or something heavy being repositioned. Then voices, multiple, raised and then cut short. Rourke looked at Dominic. Dominic looked at Elena. "Stay behind me," he said, "at all times. That's not negotiable." "Agreed," she said. They moved toward the building. The East Bay entrance was a personnel door beside the truck bay, steel, standing 2 inches open. Dominic went through first, Rourke behind him, Elena behind Rourke, and the interior was a large open space of concrete and shadow, crates stacked along the walls, fluorescent tubes running overhead with the flickering quality of industrial lighting on an old circuit. The smell was cold concrete and the chemical undertone she'd first noticed in the SUV. Gun oil, metal, the specific atmosphere of a place where things that mattered were regularly handled. Grant Holloway was standing 30 feet inside the bay. He was alone. His charcoal suit from the wedding was still on. He had never changed, had come here directly, or had been brought here. And it looked like what it was, the suit of a man who had started the day as one thing and was ending it as another. He had his phone in his hand. He had been looking at it when they entered, and when he looked up and saw Elena, his face went through something fast and unguarded before the control came back. "Elena," he said. "Grant." She stepped forward past Rourke. Dominic's hand came out, but she kept moving, not recklessly, just steadily, to a distance where she could see Grant's face without anything between them. "You've seen the transmission." His jaw flexed. "What did you send?" "Everything," she said. "Mercer Capital Structure, the shell companies, the Valieri estate transfers, Varant Clinic." She paused. "Your name is on 14 documents in that package, Grant. Your signature on 9 of them." The color went out of his face. Not gradually. At once. "That's federal exposure on 3 counts minimum," she said. "And the rival networks are receiving the same package simultaneously, which means by 6 this morning, everyone Mercer has been double-dealing is going to know exactly how they've been positioned against each other." She watched him absorb this. "Mercer is done. The only question is whether you go down with him or whether you give us what we need to finish it tonight." Grant looked at her, then at Dominic behind her, then back at Elena, and something in his expression was, for the first time she could identify, something that was not performance. It was the look of a man stripped of the architecture he'd been operating inside, standing in the open without it. "What do you need?" he said. "Where is he?" Elena said. "Exactly." Grant looked at the floor. A breath. Then, sublevel. "There's a freight elevator at the back of the main structure. He's in the operations room. It was built as a cold storage unit, reinforced walls, no exterior signal." He looked up. "He has 2 people with him, his head of security and someone I don't know." "How do we get to the freight elevator without going through his perimeter team?" "Service corridor," Grant said. "Left of the bay door runs the length of the building. His perimeter people don't cover it because it doesn't have exterior access." He paused. "He doesn't know I'm telling you this." "No," Elena said. "He doesn't." Grant looked at her abdomen. The twins. The children he had stood at an altar and publicly disavowed with fabricated evidence, who were now, and she watched him process this on his face, the understanding arriving, the center of something he had not been told the full shape of. "I didn't know about the clinic," he said, "what they did there. I didn't know what the prenuptial clause was actually activating." "I know," Elena said. She said it without warmth and without malice, just the fact of it. "That's why you're still talking to me." She turned back toward Dominic. "Service corridor," she said. They found it exactly where Grant said it was. A narrow passage running parallel to the main bay, concrete block walls, a single conduit of wire running along the ceiling. Their footsteps were quiet and fast, and the corridor was dark enough that Rourke used a penlight, low and directed at the floor. The freight elevator was at the end. Industrial, wide, the kind built to move pallets. The gate was open. They went down. The sublevel was colder than the floor above. The cold storage origin of it, Elena thought, the walls thick and insulated. The temperature deliberately managed by someone who wanted the space secure in every direction, including acoustic. The elevator opened onto a short corridor with a single door at the end, steel, a light burning underneath it. From the other side of the door, voices. 2 of them, speaking quickly, the particular staccato of people managing a situation that was not resolving the way they expected. Dominic looked at Rourke. Some communication passed between them that Elena couldn't read and didn't need to. Dominic looked at Elena. "When this door opens," he said very quietly, "you do not move forward of this position, whatever happens." She looked at him. At the specificity of his attention, the particular quality of it, not commanding her, not performing authority, asking her. The difference was real, and she felt it. "Understood," she said. He held her gaze for one more second. Then he looked at the door, and the thing that had been running underneath the controlled surface of him all night, the thing that was not fury and not grief, but was both at once, that had been building since the moment he saw the silver crest on her pendant in the rain on 56th Street, and understood that the problem he thought had been buried for 20 years was not buried at all, came to the surface. Rourke hit the door. It opened on a room that was exactly what Grant had described. Former cold storage, reinforced, a long table with monitors and communications equipment along one wall, 2 men coming to their feet from positions near the table with the trained response of people who had been expecting a threat, but not quite from this direction and not quite at this speed. Dominic moved through the door with the economy of someone who had stopped calculating risk and was operating on something more fundamental. He reached the first man in 3 strides, a large individual, broad through the shoulders, who got his hands up and managed one solid connection to Dominic's jaw before Dominic drove him back into the edge of the table with enough force to take the breath out of him. The man folded. Dominic didn't watch him finish folding. He was already moving toward the second. Rourke had the second man contained before he cleared the holster at his hip. A controlled takedown, professional, the particular violence of someone who had done this enough times that it had become procedural. 10 seconds. Maybe 12. Then silence. Silas Mercer was at the far end of the table. He had not moved. He was seated in a chair that had been positioned with deliberate centrality, and he sat in it with the stillness of a man who had known this moment was coming and had decided, somewhere in the calculus of his remaining months, that running from it was no longer a productive use of his time. He was smaller than Elena had expected. The photographs had suggested something more imposing. The silver hair, the foundation galas, the commencement addresses. In person, he was simply an old man in an expensive coat, with the particular translucent quality of someone whose body had begun the process of withdrawing from the world, whether he had authorized it or not. His eyes, though, were completely alert. He looked at Dominic first, then at Elena in the doorway, and when he looked at Elena, his expression did something she had not anticipated. It softened, not with guilt, with something that looked disturbingly like satisfaction. "You came yourself," he said. His voice was dry and precise. "I expected you to send the data and disappear." "I'm not interested in disappearing," Elena said. She stepped into the room. Dominic's hand came out and she walked past it, because she had agreed not to move forward during the breach, and the breach was over. She walked to the near end of the table and stood there and looked at the man who had engineered her existence as an instrument. "I'm interested in finishing this." "It's already finished," Mercer said. "The transmission went out. My network is fracturing as we speak. You've accomplished what you came to do." He looked at her with the eyes of a man who had built things for 50 years and could recognize construction when he saw it. "You're more than I calculated for." "Most people are," Elena said. Outside the facility, through the reinforced walls and up through the floor above them, the sound arrived. Distant at first, then not distant. Vehicles, multiple, moving fast on the waterfront road. Doors. The particular organized sound of a federal response arriving at scale, which meant Keene's transmission had done exactly what it was built to do. Mercer heard it. His expression didn't change. "It's over," Dominic said. Mercer looked at him with something almost like respect. "For now," he said. "Permanently," Elena said. She reached into the pocket of the borrowed sweater and placed her phone on the table between them. Screen up, recording active. The timestamp running in the corner. Everything said in this room for the last 4 minutes already captured. His voice, his words, his acknowledgement. She had started the recording in the elevator. Mercer looked at the phone, then at her. And for the first time tonight, something in his face shifted into territory that had not been planned for. Above them, the building filled with the sound of people who had come to end it. The federal agents came down the freight elevator in groups of 4. Elena counted them from the corner of the operations room where she had positioned herself against the wall, not hiding, not retreating, simply placing herself out of the operational center of the space so that the people with jurisdiction could occupy it without navigating around a 6 months pregnant woman in a borrowed sweater. She counted 12 agents in the first 4 minutes. Then 3 more. Then a woman in a dark jacket who moved differently from the others, not with the controlled urgency of field response, but with the particular authority of someone who had been awake for 18 hours managing the upstream of this and was here now to see the downstream in person. The woman stopped in the center of the room and looked at Mercer, still seated at the far end of the table. She looked at Dominic, standing to the left of the table with his hands visible and his expression giving nothing away. She looked at the 2 men Dominic and Rourke had taken down, now restrained and conscious in the corner. Then she looked at Elena. "You're Ashcroft," she said. "Yes." "The recording is yours?" "Yes." The woman, she gave her name as Agent Reyes, Organized Crime Division, and said it the way people say names that are temporarily less important than what they're there to do. Held out her hand. Elena gave her the phone. Reyes looked at the timestamp, looked at the screen, looked at Elena. 4 minutes and 11 seconds, Reyes said. 47 seconds of that is silence or movement, Elena said. The substantive portion begins at the 30-second mark. Reyes looked at her with the expression of someone recalibrating an assumption. Then she nodded once and moved toward Mercer. What happened next was procedural and thorough, and took a long time, the way federal actions in the field take a long time because they are being done correctly rather than quickly. Mercer was read his rights in the same dry, precise tone he had used to speak to Elena, and he received them with the same stillness he'd maintained since the door came open. The stillness of a man who had spent 50 years controlling rooms and had arrived finally at a room he could not control, and had decided that dignity was the only remaining asset worth protecting. He said nothing, not one word after the agents arrived. He looked at Elena once more across the length of the table, and the look was not threatening and not defeated, and she could not assign it a clean emotional category. It was the look of someone who had spent a lifetime seeing people as components in a structure and was encountering, at the end, the experience of being seen in return. She did not look away. He was taken out through the freight elevator at 5:41 in the morning. Elena watched him go and felt nothing dramatic, not triumph, not relief, not exactly, something quieter than either of those. The particular absence of a pressure that had been present so long, she had stopped registering it as pressure, and had started registering it as the normal texture of being alive. She sat down on the edge of the table and put her hands on her stomach, and the twins moved. Both of them, a slow rolling shift, the kind they made when she'd been very still and then changed position. And she sat with that for a moment in the cold room, while around her the procedural machinery of consequence continued its work. Dominic came to stand beside her, not close. The appropriate distance of someone who understood that the moment belonged to her and was choosing to be present at the edge of it rather than in the center. Rourke has Grant in the upper bay, he said. Reyes's people will want him. I know. Your father is in the third vehicle outside. A pause. That's also going to need to be addressed. I know that too. She looked at the monitors along the wall, the screens that had been running Mercer's operational feeds, most of them dark now, some of them still displaying the skeleton of a network in the process of collapsing. Shell company names she recognized from Holloway's financial documents, a real-time ledger updating as accounts were frozen by federal action. The digital image of something enormous coming apart, displayed in clean columns and rows, bloodless and absolute. The prenuptial addendum, she said, the inheritance clause. Page 7. My legal team is already on it, a signed document under fraudulent inducement with a demonstrably fabricated purpose. It won't hold. He paused. The Valieri estate assets that were transferred fraudulently over the past 11 years are a separate matter. That's civil litigation that could take years, she said. I know. Yes. She looked at him. At his face in the flat fluorescent light of the sub-level operations room, tired and precise and carrying the weight of a night that had rearranged multiple things for both of them. He had lost things tonight. Not just the exposure of his family's historical operations in the federal record, though that was real and the consequences of it were going to be long and complicated, but something more personal. The settled architecture of a life built carefully around what he knew and could control. She had arrived in the rain in a ruined dress and dismantled it in 9 hours. I'm sorry, she said, for what this costs you. He looked at her with an expression that was not comfortable and not performed. Don't be, he said. Some things should cost something. She held his gaze and then looked away, because the moment was becoming something she didn't have the bandwidth to hold right now on top of everything else. And she was also 6 months pregnant and had been awake for 22 hours, and her ankle hurt, and the twins were pushing against her left side with the insistent physical advocacy of people who had not been consulted about any of this and were registering their position. She stood up. I need to go upstairs, she said. I need air. The waterfront in the early morning was cold and gray and real in the way that the world outside is always more real than the inside of anything after a long night. The harbor smell, the particular industrial texture of Red Hook's waterfront, the sky above the water gone from black to the specific dark blue that preceded actual dawn by 40 minutes. Somewhere across the harbor, the lights of the opposite shore made yellow reflections on the water that moved and broke and reformed. Elena stood at the edge of the dock and breathed. Behind her, the facility was a controlled operational scene. Vehicles, agents, the contained and purposeful movement of a federal action in its middle phase. Ahead of her was water and the beginning of morning, and the knowledge that the next chapter of whatever her life was going to have to be built from materials that had not existed 24 hours ago. She heard footsteps on the dock behind her and turned. Marco Valieri, her father, walking toward her with the careful movement of a man who was not certain of his reception and was not going to presume one. He stopped 6 feet away. He was looking at her face in the early light with the expression she'd seen in the operations room, that complicated weight of a man confronting the account of his own life and finding the numbers wrong. "I gave a statement to Agent Reyes," he said. "Everything I know about Mercer's network from the beginning, every contact, every operation I was aware of, every step of what he built." He paused. "I'll be in federal custody by tonight, most likely. My protected status doesn't survive this." "No," Elena said, "it doesn't. I'm not asking you to—" He stopped, started differently. "There's nothing I can ask you for that would be reasonable." "No," she said again, not cruelly, just accurately. He looked at the water. His profile in the early light was her profile. She could see it clearly now in the way she hadn't been able to see it in artificial light. The angle of it, the particular set of the jaw. Biological fact. Inescapable and strange. "Your mother," he said. "She was the best person I knew. She was better than anything I built or did or became." His voice was even, and she could hear the effort it cost to keep it even. "She spent her life protecting you from what I was." "She did," Elena said. "Did she—" He stopped again. "Did she what? Did she ever say anything? About me?" That wasn't— He couldn't complete it. Elena looked at her father. At this man who had been dead for 31 years and was standing 6 feet from her on a dock in Red Hook at 5:50 in the morning, waiting to find out if his dead lover had left him anything in the record of her spoken life. She thought about her mother, about the one-bedrooms and the moves and the watchful exhaustion and the way she'd pressed the necklace into Elena's hands at the end with, "This is yours. This has always been yours." She thought about the letter that said, "Don't look into this. The less you know, the safer you'll be," and the single photograph given on a 19th birthday, with no name attached, and no explanation beyond "This was your father." She had given Elena his face, when she could have given her nothing, when nothing would have been safer. "She kept your photograph," Elena said. "That's all I can tell you." Marco closed his eyes. The harbor moved below them, indifferent and continuous. "That's more than I deserve," he said. "Yes," Elena said. "It is." She turned back toward the facility. She had things to do, a statement to give, a legal process to begin, a body that needed to sleep before it made that decision for her. She had a friend who had betrayed her in the custody of federal agents, and she did not know yet what she felt about that, or what she was going to do about it beyond what the law would do first. She had a man who had stood at an altar and destroyed her publicly, who was going to face 3 federal counts minimum, and she felt about that, the clean, uncomplicated feeling of consequence arriving where it belonged. She had 2 children who had been engineered as instruments and who were going to be born in approximately 3 months into a world that owed them an enormous and specific debt. She stopped before she reached the facility door and turned back once. "Marco," she said. He looked at her. "When the legal process is done, whatever it looks like, I'll come and see you." She said it without warmth and without coldness, as a fact she had decided on and was delivering accurately. "I'm not going to pretend that means something it doesn't, but I'll come." He nodded once, very small, the nod of a man receiving something he had not expected and was handling carefully because he was afraid of breaking it. She went inside. The weeks that followed were not clean. Nothing about consequence is clean. It is administrative and exhausting and full of rooms with bad lighting and people asking the same questions in different sequences to confirm that the answers are consistent, which they were, because Elena had spent her adult life being precise about what she knew versus what she believed versus what she could demonstrate. And it turned out this was excellent preparation for federal proceedings. Mercer was charged on 41 counts across 4 jurisdictions. The recording from the sub-level operations room was entered into evidence on the 14th day of proceedings, and the defense team's response to it was 3 days of procedural challenges that resolved in the prosecution's favor. His medical situation, the terminal diagnosis, the 18 months that had been his operating deadline, became public record and generated the particular kind of media attention that attached to stories about powerful men building monuments to themselves against the clock. It did not generate sympathy. Silas Mercer had never cultivated sympathy, had never needed it, and did not receive it now. Grant Holloway entered a cooperation agreement on the 4th day. He gave the federal prosecutors everything they asked for and a significant amount they hadn't thought to ask for, which reduced his exposure considerably and his dignity absolutely. Elena did not watch the coverage of his testimony. She was in a different federal building giving her own, and she was thorough and accurate and answered every question put to her and did not editorialize and went home, afterward to the apartment Dominic's legal team had arranged for her, and slept for 14 hours. Cassie's situation was the most legally complicated and the most personally costly. In the specific way that personal costs are different from legal ones, the legal resolution arrived in a defined form with a defined timeline. But the personal cost didn't resolve at 6 years of cooperation agreement. It didn't resolve at the sentencing hearing Elena attended without knowing why she was attending until she was there and understood that she needed to see the full shape of it with her own eyes in order to carry it correctly. Cassie looked at her from across the courtroom with the expression Elena had last seen in the apartment in Astoria. The professional calculation gone, the performance gone, just the actual person underneath it who had been real for 3 years before she was anything else. Elena did not nod at her. She did not look away either. She sat through the proceeding, and when it was done, she walked out into the afternoon and stood on the courthouse steps and breathed the spring air. April now. The trees along the street in their early green, the light different from March in the way that New York light was always different in April, softer, the angle of it changed. And she understood that she was not going to forgive Cassie quickly or cleanly, and that this was an accurate response to an accurate situation, and that she was going to carry it alongside everything else, and it was not going to kill her. She was not the kind of person things killed easily. She had established this conclusively. The twins were born on a Tuesday in late May at 7:14 and 7:19 in the morning at a hospital in Manhattan with a legal team already on file regarding their birth certificates and a security arrangement that Dominic had insisted on and Elena had accepted because she was practical about the things that mattered. A girl first, then a boy. Both healthy, both loud in the specific way that newborns are loud. Not words, not yet, but communication in the most fundamental register available. The register that required no language and no cultural context and no understanding of what the world was, because the world was simply this: presence, warmth, the basic biological fact of having arrived. Elena held them one at a time and then both at once, which was logistically complex and emotionally incomprehensible in the way that the significant things always were. And she sat in the hospital bed with them and looked at their faces and looked for what she feared finding, the marks of what had been done to them before they existed, the engineering, the instrument they had been designed to be, and found instead two faces that were simply themselves, unmistakable and unknown and completely new. She named the girl Nora, the boy she named after no one, which was a choice, the deliberate selection of a clean starting point, James. Simple, his own. Dominic came to the hospital on the second day. He came alone, without security, which Elena noted and understood as a statement he was making consciously. He knocked on the open door of the room and waited to be invited in, which she noted also. She invited him in. He looked at the twins in their bassinet, two small people asleep in the particular absolute way of newborns, as though sleep were a full-body commitment rather than a state. And the expression on his face was something she did not try to interpret. It was too layered. It had too much history in it, too much of the complicated geography of what he was and wasn't to these children, and what had been done in his name before his knowledge. James carries the markers, she said, not gently, not cruelly. He needed to know, and she told him. Yes, he said. He had known since the full genetic panel came back in April. What that means legally is still being determined. My attorneys are working with yours. He looked at the boy. Whatever the legal structure becomes, I want you to know that I don't intend to use it as leverage, as a claim. He looked at Elena. He's yours. They both are. What I am to them is whatever you determine is appropriate, and I'll abide by that. Elena looked at him for a long moment, at this man who had stopped a truck in the rain and asked her one accurate question and brought her out of the cold and then spent the next several months dismantling the structure of his own life to help her reclaim hers. I haven't determined it yet, she said. I know. I'll tell you when I have. All right. He looked at the twins again. Nora had one fist raised in sleep, tight and small and absolute. James had his mouth slightly open with the complete lack of self-consciousness of someone who had been in the world for 36 hours. They're real, Dominic said, quietly. Not to Elena specifically, to the room, to the fact of it. The statement of someone who had been dealing in abstractions, bloodlines, inheritance, engineered connections, the architecture of what these children were supposed to represent, and was encountering for the first time the concrete reality of what they actually were. Very, Elena said. He stayed for 20 minutes. He did not overstay. When he left, he paused in the doorway and looked back once, and she could see in the set of him, the shoulders, the jaw, the particular way he occupied a threshold, that something had shifted in the man since the rain on 56th Street. Some weight redistributed, some structural element changed. She thought she understood what it was. She thought it was the specific change that happened to people who had been operating inside a system built by other people's violence for long enough that they had stopped seeing it as a system and had started seeing it as the world, and then something happened that showed them the edge of it, the place where it ended, and something else began. She did not know yet what he was going to do with that. She thought he probably didn't know yet either. That seemed honest. The Valieri estate litigation resolved 14 months later in a form that her legal team described as favorable and that Elena described privately as complicated, which it was. Assets recovered, assets permanently lost, a Delaware trust account finally attached to a living beneficiary for the first time in 23 years, a series of property claims that took 3 more years to finalize and required her presence at proceedings in 4 states. She attended everyone. She brought the twins to 2 of them when they were old enough, and sat in the legal rooms and was precise and accurate and exhausted and did not stop. The foundation she established was called the Nora Valieri Foundation, named for the girl and for the name she had reclaimed, and it worked in 2 areas: legal advocacy for children in fraudulent adoption circumstances and financial exploitation recovery for victims of inheritance fraud. The first year's operating budget came from the recovered Delaware Trust. The second year's came from donations, which surprised her and then stopped surprising her because she had learned, in the past 2 years, to stop being surprised by the ways that people wanted to participate in the repair of things. Marco Valieri served 4 years of a 6-year federal sentence reduced for cooperation. Elena visited him 3 times during those years. The visits were not warm and were not cold. They were accurate. 2 people occupying the same small room with the weight of everything between them and the decision renewed each time to remain present in it rather than leave. On the 3rd visit, she brought a photograph, not the one from her wallet, a new one. Nora and James at 18 months, in a park. Nora with both hands in dirt, and James looking at something off-frame with the particular focus of a child who had found something interesting that no one else had noticed yet. She left it with him when she went. She did not watch him look at it. Some things were private enough that witness would have destroyed them. The silver necklace she wore every day. This was not a statement and not a symbol. It was simply the thing her mother had given her, and she wore it, the way you wear the things that belong to you, without ceremony. The crest turned inward, sometimes against her skin, so that it was present without being visible. A private thing. The Valieri name was on a foundation now, and on 2 birth certificates, and on legal documents in 4 states. And it was also on the pendant that rested against her sternum, small and specific, and hers, no longer a mystery or a weapon or a key to someone else's architecture. Just a name, just a thing that had survived. On a morning in early September, the twins almost 16 months old, the litigation in its second year, the foundation in its first, the particular quality of New York in early autumn when the light comes at a low angle and the air has changed its character without yet committing to cold. Elena sat at the kitchen table in the apartment she had leased in her own name and drank coffee and looked out the window at the street below. The twins were asleep. Both of them, which happened less often now than it had in the early months, and would happen less often still as they got older. She knew this already, the way you know the things you have been told by people who are further down the road. And the apartment was quiet in the specific way that apartments were quiet when small people who were usually loud were temporarily elsewhere in their minds. She sat with the coffee and the quiet and the light and the particular sensation of a morning that was simply a morning, containing nothing required of her beyond the next hour and then the hour after that. Her phone was on the table. She had 3 messages she hadn't answered yet. Her legal team, the foundation's new program director with a question about the first grant cycle, and Dominic, a single line, Nora's pediatric appointment Tuesday. Do you still want me there? She looked at that last one for a moment, at the question in it, which was not only about the pediatric appointment, which was about the larger question that had been present since the hospital room in May, since the doorway, and the 20 minutes, and the look on his face when he said they're real. The question of what the next chapter was going to be built from and who was going to be in it. She picked up the phone. She typed, "Yes, 10 o'clock, don't be late." She set the phone down. Outside, a taxi moved through the intersection. A woman walked a dog. 2 men stood talking outside the coffee shop on the corner, one of them laughing at something the other had said, the laugh visible before the sound reached the window. The ordinary motion of a city that had never stopped moving regardless of what was happening inside any specific life contained within it. Elena Ashcroft, Elena Valieri, on the foundation documents, though she used both and was still deciding what she preferred and understood that the deciding was itself the point, finished her coffee. She thought about her mother. She thought about her most mornings, not with grief anymore, not primarily, but with the specific texture of understanding that arrived when you finally knew the full shape of someone's choices and could see what each one had cost and what it had protected. Her mother had spent a life running and had given Elena the one thing that running couldn't give, a starting point, a name engraved on silver, a face in a photograph, the raw material of a question that Elena had eventually answered herself. She thought, I know now. She thought, that's what you wanted. The twins woke at 7:43, James first, announcing his return to consciousness with the particular vocal energy of a person who had somewhere to be, followed 12 seconds later by Nora, who woke more quietly but with no less intention. Elena heard them through the baby monitor on the counter, and she stood up from the kitchen table and rinsed her coffee cup and set it in the rack and walked down the hall toward the sound of them. She opened the door. 2 faces looked up at her from the crib, one demanding, one curious, both absolutely and entirely themselves. And Elena looked back at them in the early September light coming through the curtains and felt the things she had been feeling every morning for 16 months and had not yet found a word for. The thing that was not simply love because love was too small a container for it, that was something more like recognition, the repeated daily discovery that these specific people existed in the world and that she was the person they looked at first. "Good morning," she said. Nora reached up with both hands. Elena lifted her daughter out of the crib and held her against her chest and felt the solid, warm weight of her, real, present, indisputably here, and then lifted James with the other arm in the logistically complex maneuver she had been practicing for 16 months and was still not elegant at and would probably never be elegant at and had stopped needing to be. She stood in the morning light with her children and breathed. Outside, New York continued its work. The silver pendant rested at her throat, the crest pressed warm against her skin, turned inward, private, and still.